Good.
Everyone, this is Taylor from Broadwing.
Yeah, I'll introduce myself, Taylor from Broadwing. So I'm here with JD and the rest of Broadwing. I think Darren, the other partner here, was here the first day, had to take off. But a little bit about myself. So I come from a DevOps background primarily. So a couple years ago, I did a bunch of CSM work, helping HPE build out some of their stack in Vagrant specifically. So we did a lot of stuff for building this all out in Vagrant, did a little proof of concept out into GCP as well. So there was doing a lot of, at the time was Jenkins pipelines. So we kind of wrapped all of these tools, put them up into Jenkins, deploy those out to GCP, verify the stack, kind of what we're doing a little bit in the tutorial this afternoon, but all locally and in GCP. So in the last couple years, more recently, I've primarily been doing a lot of GitHub Actions automation work, both in GCP and AWS. So I'm not super familiar with the OpenCHAMI microservices and repos, but we've been spending the last couple of weeks getting familiar with those. We have a backlog of tasks of kind of enhancements that we want to do in the repo itself in the GitHub organization. So I think we're going to start getting into those. I think that's what Alex is bringing up here. And so I guess to start there, I think the first thing he's probably going to show once he shares his screen is I think a lot of the microservices right now essentially kind of have a go releaser action right now. And they all kind of do things mostly the same, slightly different. And so kind of one of the first things we're doing, there's already a couple of PRs up. Maybe some of you've already seen some of them. But it's just to create more of a reusable workflow is what they call in GitHub. So one single GitHub workflow that can live in a single repository. I think right now we're using the .github repo in OpenCHAMI. And then all the other sub repos, I think we're doing like the power control first, SPM one, I think maybe next is a handful of ones that we want to target. But essentially those have a really light wrapper workflow that goes off and just calls this more monolithic build and release pipeline that's in a single source of truth. So that's kind of one of the things that we're going to do to get all of the repos on the same page. Bring that up, I guess we can get into the code a little bit too if you want that. So I don't know how you want to handle that part.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a handful of these questions, but
Sure.
let me switch over to here. I'm hoping folks can still hear me as I'm not holding the microphone.
Yep, we can hear you.
Cool. All right. So what you've already been working on with us is the GitHub Actions repository, which folks may or may not. I don't know how many of you have been diving into this, but the reusable workflow, one of the things that folks, I did not know that you could use reusable workflows like this. And so Taylor wrote this one, which is then parameterized. And so now when we go to, get that out of the way.
Yeah, I think power control, I think, is the first one that we try to introduce it to. It's worth pointing out, I'll mention, so there's two ways to go about reusable workflows. What we've done here, which is a reusable workflow, there's also a thing called composite actions. So sometimes you'll see some YAML bits like inside the actions folders instead of the workflows. So actions, you can think about more, they're running within the context of the existing workflow. You'll see things almost everywhere has like a checkout action, right? So that actually runs within the current runner. It has access to all the files, environment variables that previous steps did. While a workflow is actually running on its own dedicated runner, depending on where you put it. So it has its own context, its own space, and that's how they're separated there. So the use cases for both.
Is this the one I should be looking at?
Yep. Yeah. So we read this. Travis made some good points. The first one you can see in there. I think there's a link to the previous PR we did a couple of weeks back. So you'll see this one has a lot of, you'll see concepts in there between release and snapshot. So I think what we're trying to do, right, is on every single PR that gets created that is for not for a tag, but just the PR itself, it's gonna do what's called a snapshot build. So I'm not super familiar with Go Releaser, but my understanding is Go Releaser snapshot builds are essentially gonna do the build process, but not push them up to the registry. And so those are good use case for pull request creation, right? So we can go off and validate that the Go Releaser builds. It's just one of the extra tests that run, right? And then on a tag release, it goes through some extra bits of code and actually does a normal Go Releaser run and pushes up, and it can also do all the adaptation stuff afterwards because it's actually being pushed up to the registry and has response and all that. So this is essentially what it turns into, right? I think on the PR you saw there's a bunch of deletes. It's what it used to be, and now this is just a very simple workflow that just wraps the reusable one that we have in the GitHub. Sure. Yeah, and then there's some inputs there, right? There, I think like the pre-built commands and the binary path, for example, there's a few things in each of them that were unique that need to be run first. And so we just left some parameters, some inputs there, so you can slightly tweak what you need to have happen before and after and so forth.
So as a contrast, like when we started doing Go Releaser for all of our Go microservices, what we ended up doing was basically copy and paste the same thing from one to the next, because we're using Go Releaser. It's just a different way of using Go Releaser. This has dramatically shortened these things, but it also means that if we make an update, all of the systems, then all of the different microservices get the benefit.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, you'll see there's tags in there right now. I think online, like, what is that, 15? You'll see the end. I'm just referencing a SHA. This is just a draft release. Eventually, we point that to a tagged version of this Go build release workflow. So I've seen it done different ways. You can point to a specific tag of that. You could also point to just latest or main or whatever. That way you guarantee if we make changes on the parent workflow, it automatically applies without having to update all the other repositories.
Okay. So as we're looking through this, like this was a bit of low-hanging fruit. Like I didn't know that we had this option in GitHub. You guys were able to come in and show where that was. You're able to fix this for us. But I think that was a question I knew how to ask.
Sure.
But there's a bunch of other stuff that we're doing with GitHub where I don't know how to ask the questions. And so what I was hoping to talk to you about is, in general, our organization, the way we set things up. We've got our .github repository, which has a handful of the things in it which are common to all parts of our organization. We have the community repository, which has a lot of information about how we make changes, how we organize ourselves as an organization. And then we're now adding our GitHub Actions repository, which also includes additional actions. And I think we'll probably end up with, so this is how we're signing RPMs now. We've got an action that we've pulled in here. But what other things should we be thinking about for the way that we evolve our use of GitHub to, manage this project?
Yeah, so we've talked about a couple so far, so just kind of reiterate on those. I think one of them is, so there's this whole like required checks that you can also do within GitHub organization. So I think it was the power control one. I think I forget the acronym, like DTO or DSO. It's essentially the one that requires that you have to signed off by, right? So I think that's only wired up to that repo, maybe some others individually, right? There are things you can do at the org level. You can go into like the organization itself and put in like these checks are required to run essentially the workflow that you can point to. So you can use that for the signed off by one. You can also do it for what we're talking about, the signing, right? Making sure that things were actually signed correctly on all the underlying repos release builds. So that they actually have like the SBOM, everything else is there for the binaries that they get pushed up through. So you can do things like that. There's also things, I mean, you probably all seen in the open source world, you open up a PR, right? And the first like bot creates a comment on there, they go out and signs user agreement right before you can contribute to our repo. So that's all done via the organization checks. When it comes down to almost everything is bots in the GitHub Actions space. So what's another good use case? So there's the labeling, right? So if you start one like triage a bunch of issues or maybe mark them as stale, like if you have an issue or a PR that doesn't have any movement, you essentially have bots that kind of run in the background, which is essentially just another action, and they can go off and then do the initial triage. I've seen some people even trying to wire those up to LLMs to kind of help you create the correct label appropriately. So you go off and look at the ticket itself, label it, and then there's another thing we were going to talk about too was like the code owners and teams, right? So this goes hand in hand with that. So everyone probably knows you have the teams inside of GitHub itself, right? And so you can break down the teams at the org level as well as the repo level. And then those wire up to the code owners as well. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with this, but you have the code owners in the repo. Essentially, code owners is the blob syntax. You say like these file paths within the repo belong to these teams. And that way when a PR gets created for a specific repo, it goes and links to that code owner's file and assigns the PR to the appropriate team. And then at the org level as well, you then say like, hey, code owners have to approve the PRs that belong to them. So that's one thing we talked about.
So like reorganizing this, like engineers from Lanel is not really a group that would work well within code owners because we work across multiple things. But if we were to add something else here that would be like SMD maintainers, then we could direct that with the code owners for SMD.
Yeah, no, you see, it's kind of you'd have kind of like an OpenCHAMI, you got an SMD for just the SMD like repo. You can also have more generic ones like security. You can have say maybe like a GitHub automation team, right? And anytime someone touches something within the .GitHub repo, it gets assigned to someone that's part of that team that can go over. So yeah, there's kind of you split it up in the hierarchy, right? You have org level teams, and then you create repo specific ones, and then tied to like either like front end, back end is pretty common as well, right? So if you have one kind of monolithic repo, you can have front end, back end teams based off the paths that get touched in the PR, it's assigned appropriately.
So as we think through refactoring some of the way that we're using GitHub, you mentioned the bots that happen at the organization level. Is that how do those work? Where should we be thinking about, like, should I be browsing to a place where here's where we should put the bot kind of stuff?
Yeah, so again, the bots are really just actions, right? So right now you have your actions like often you would go build release, right? But if that bot were to then be like, hey, the build fails, like maybe here's another example, you want to set up a scheduled action that runs once a week and just goes off and like pulls the latest kind of packages from the OS level and tries to build, make sure to run unit tests to make sure everything works. Right? If that fails, that action can then go off and write a PR or an issue like up. And that's how the dependent bot works as well, right? That everyone's probably seen, like when it detects dependency changes, it creates the PR or the issue itself to fix those. And you'll always see those come with like the bot tag. So whenever an action does something to GitHub's APIs automatically, it's just labeled as a bot. And so pretty much everything is just called a bot. So that's how that works. You'll see the bots come up. And we've done this a lot too, like we have the project I'm working on now, they have a big suite of tests that run. And they can also go off and kind of their suite of tests require like infrastructure to be created. And so they'll have like every week or so, the bot will go off and like find old environments that aren't needed anymore. It's all GitOps driven, so it'll actually create a PR to delete some YAML files that will then trigger a plan to delete the infrastructure. That creates the PR and it leaves it open for a day by default because like their infrastructure team time to go off and like check it and make sure no one's using it if they want to. And then a separate bot then like checks if it's been there for more than like 24 hours or a week, depending on the use case. It actually applies that bot, which then triggers another action to go off and destroy the infrastructure. So these are all various ways bots could be used.
So you were talking about things that can be common at the org level. So for DCO at the org level, are these other things that you're talking about, which would probably span multiple repos, are those org level type things, or should we be creating new repos for our automation for like, doing testing of a bunch of things together.
I would say if it's gonna be used across multiple repos, what you have now, the GitHub Actions repo is probably the right place for it. Depending on if it's a like a reusable workflow or a reusable composite action. I think that GitHub does require those to be named in a certain way and placed in a certain subfolder. But other than that, I would say this is the right place to do it, right? As long as you have the right naming convention in there, it's easy to tell if it's repo specific or organization specific. It does get a bit like unwieldy because most of the workflows have to live inside that .github workflow. So, like again, the place that I now, I think they have like one of these folders has like hundreds of files in there. So it's very important to name them correctly. If you're gonna have like repo specific ones or purpose specific to name them so that they're organized correctly, not in alphabetical order. It makes it easier to find it since you can't use folders here. That's one thing I've noticed.
Okay. Are there other? You had a cheat sheet.
Yeah, I had a list of kind of our backlog items that we were.
There were things we're thinking about.
Yeah.
So what are the stuff that we as developers here, like, what should we not keep doing manually and should we turn over to automation?
I think the based off the last talk, right? The signing, I think, is definitely one of them, right? Like you asked the question of how to go about doing that with the microservices up to the release. I mean, that'd be a primary use case, right? Like the release process could be more automated and then validate that the microservices releases were done correctly and have the right files and SBOM and adaptations that you expect to be there. Could be one thing. Let's see. Oh, the other thing that we were going to talk about too was so there's the platform specific builds. Right. I don't know if you're doing that now with Go release or kind of supports that with like AMD or ARM builds. But you can do that in GitHub as well. So I don't think you have them right now, but you can set up self-hosted runners, which I'm guessing most people here that use GitHub probably have some sort of self-hosted runners. But you could take it a step further, right, and have platform specific runners. So based off the label, you can make it sure it goes to the right runner. And then all of the Docker Podman builds can then build to specific platforms, and then I think you can wire them up together, right, with the manifest image. To the point of so you go off and run essentially both platform builds in parallel. Once that's done, it goes up and wires them together to a single image.
So the talk yesterday on VTDS would be an example of that. If we wanted to run, anytime we update the release repository, which pulls together a bunch of stuff, we would want to then have VTS started up and run a bunch of tests against it and then return results in GitHub format on a hosted runner. Is that kind of, or we say we need to pull a node, an ARM node from someplace to build an ARM system image or something along those lines.
Yeah.
I saw a question. Travis, do you still have a microphone? I think I lost one of the microphones.
Yeah, hold on.
So when we first started doing this, I'm not an expert in GitHub or DevOps really at all. But we were looking into kind of what you were just talking about, where we didn't have the release RPM at the time. We just had like all these different repos or whatever. But where you change one of the microservices and then you go, the end goal is to boot a cluster or boot nodes at the end of it, right? So there's that pipeline or whatever.
Yeah.
The self-hosted runners kind of terrified me a little bit because I wasn't sure how to lock all that down so that like random people could just start using it. I tried to go through the GitHub documentation and it's a lot.
Yeah.
So I tried to do, I forget all the terminology, but I made like a cert or something in the org. Then you had to do like 15 different curl requests to get various levels of keys.
Okay.
To sort of protect this self runner. Is that something you know how to do?
Yeah, we set up self-hosted runners all over the place. Yeah, I don't remember it being quite that difficult. I know there's kind of two ways to set up self-hosted runners. You can have kind of a long-standing self-hosted runner, so you can have some dedicated hardware, right? The issue with those, right, is you have one job, maybe it goes off and installs some packages at the OS level, and then like the next repo uses that and that messes it up, right? And so it's better to have what's called like the ephemeral.
Yeah, so that's one we're trying to use the ephemeral one. So we spin it up and then try to
Yeah,
do things.
we do it a lot mostly in like the Kubernetes world, but I'm sure you can do it at like the hardware level as well, right? Every time a job comes in, essentially there's a queue. I think you hook up to webhooks, right? So the repo or the org level, they want to use runners. It goes in, it triggers the webhook. You kind of have some sort of service there that's listening for those webhooks. So like, hey, is there enough runners in place to run this job that one?
Yeah, like making. Oh, okay. So he was asking about like what I was worried about as for the runner. So
Public or private, right? So I think I can maybe answer a little bit there too, right? One of the concerns, right, is if you have an open source repo with a dedicated runner on private infrastructure, you don't want anyone that creates a PR to go off and run
Right.
arbitrary GitHub actions that just run like shell commands, right? It is kind of the worry. So that protection actually is somewhat built in to GitHub itself. I think you can even look at the PR because I'm not a maintainer or like part of any of the OpenCHAMI groups. So you can actually see when I ran or opened up that PR, it actually wouldn't run any of the actions by default. So by default, it actually, and this is not even a self-hosted runner, right? This is just the normal checks, the regular GitHub actions, because those are still protected as well, right? Those have access to your GitHub org secrets. They can go off and they have like the GitHub token that's built into actions can go off and do stuff for you by default on your repository. So there's even not using self-hosted runners, GitHub Actions can do quite a bit, right? So GitHub handles that by locking down the ability to run actions from new contributors, like you have to be a maintainer or have the maintainer approve that. So you'll see that on the PR I create. It's like, hey, you can't run any of these checks yet until a maintainer OpenCHAMI like approves this run. And so that would apply to the self-hosted runners as well.
yeah, because I think I made a repo for it that was private because I was worried about random
Yep.
stuff running. And yeah.
So that's another thing to think about with the teams is if we're going to use code owners, like keep in mind that in order to run the actions, someone from code owners has to say yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. In order to run like all of this stuff, all this automation is based on the people in the code owners who are selected. And that can be groups, but it could also be any GitHub user can be listed in that code owners.
Correct. Yeah.
They don't have to be part of OpenCHAMI.
Yeah, typically you'd want to do it at the group level, right? And it supports nested groups as well. So you could even have a group that's like open, like community contributors or something, and you could go in and add individuals to that as you see fit, and maybe go improvement every so often.
So one of the questions that we've been asked to answer is how big do we expect our GitHub organization to be? And I think that currently there's a lot of people that have an account in the GitHub organization just so that they can push to one or two repositories. And I think that if we narrow that down, that to be part of the GitHub organization, you are a maintainer and you have these responsibilities in code owners, and then getting people more comfortable with building off of their own forks might be a good idea for us to then use our resources more responsibly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's how I did it too, right? Since I was going to contribute, I forked it. I was working on the workflows itself, so I was able to point once we had the initial PR and had the reasonable workflow. My fork was able to then run, like reference that open source, OpenCHAMI reasonable workflow, even though I was running it within a port. It obviously wouldn't have access to the name of the GitHub or secrets to the OpenCHAMI role. I wouldn't have access to run on dedicated runners that you guys have, but I could run them on the GitHub, open the free runners have access to whatever secret I have in my.
So part of the reason I wanted to make sure that we were doing this today is to help the community understand, like, there's a lot to running this community and figuring out how to take advantage of the tools that we have. We're not experts. It's good to have people around us who can help guide us. But the other piece is we have a hackathon tomorrow and we can fix some of these things tomorrow. So if there's something on here that you're like, wow, I wish we had an action that does X, Y, Z, or I wish I had someone like Taylor to guide me through putting together this automation. We have a hackathon tomorrow where Taylor will be here. And so we can start to work through some of that. So I think JD is going to lead us a bit later in hackathon prep, but these are the kinds of questions that we should come up with. And so with about, 5 minutes left, there's more questions, obviously, but and so we can move on. It looks like Travis has a question. So Travis, can you hand Travis the mic?
Yeah.
So I'm not sure, is there any way at all to say that you can do both like a pure Docker build and Go releaser? Or is it just going to be like, would have to be maintained separately? So right now, I think I have two problems. One, if I want to do an ad hoc build of something that's like, local code on my machine, I believe you can do this with a Go releaser, but I don't think we have it documented anywhere.
Yeah.
That's probably easy to fix. The other thing is if I want to like build a delve image for doing live debugging, I don't think Go releaser can do that as easily, but it's pretty easy to do in Docker and for different targets.
I would guess you could maybe answer that better than me. I think you might know Go releaser more than anyone here.
Probably.
But my understanding though is I think it comes down to he'll correct me probably, but I think it's the snapshot build. From my understanding of the docs, like most people locally will do Go releaser with snapshot for their local testing as well.
Yeah, I got a mic. I've now not forgotten that I have a microphone. Yeah, so for one of the reasons we picked Go Releaser is because it can do local builds and it handles multi-arch and it makes sure that all of the stuff is headed into the right place. So I can help you tomorrow or later today to figure out how to take advantage of it to build the kinds of things you want to build so that you can do those locally. And if there's something it can't do and we want to do something else, figure out what to do there. But I have tried to work within Go Releaser throughout all of this because it was just the tool that we chose early on. If it doesn't end up being the long-term best tool, that's okay. We'll just figure out the next thing.
Yeah, I think there are good reasons that we kind of want and need to use it. If we want to generate RPMs, like Docker is not really going to be good for that. I don't know if anyone has experience to say like, yes, you can. In fact, well, I think we already know you can do the local builds. We just need to actually write it somewhere. I'm more curious about the delve portion of things, if that's at all possible or no one has actually done it then.
Delve?
Yes, the kind of standard-ish Go debugger. So I want to build a Docker image and I want to be able to like connect to it and say like step through the code manually to try and figure out why something is broken.
Oh,
And I know how to do that in Docker builds, but I don't know how to do it in Go releaser.
okay.
I think it's probably possible to do something with like you tell it to compile with the flags that Delve needs and then put it into a different Docker target that runs the Delve executable. But
I think that sounds like a great thing to work on in the
I give
hackathon.
myself work.
No, and I'm
questions.
happy to help too. But yeah, no, I think we should be able to do that. And then if we can figure it out, we should be able to apply it to all of the repos. So that everyone benefits.
Are you all using Go releaser for everything?
The question was, are we using Go Releaser for everything? We are using Go Releaser for all Go builds.
We use that too with this, so it's works really well.
Yeah, I was looking at it while you were talking. I definitely want to try to look through that. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. I think that there's more, I understood more about Witness today than I did before. I think there's a bunch of other things we could probably do with it too. So cool. All right, are there other questions?
I can ask about how we want to handle Conman.
Oh yeah,
Are we okay with just using upstream builds of Conman, or do we want to figure out a way to do our own with our own attestations of it? So the unfortunate project that has a Go thing that lives alongside a C thing that we currently don't build ourselves.
so that's an excellent question because it leads into like, what are we attesting when we attest a microservice? If we're attesting that we've got a binary that we just pulled from the internet and it was fine, and we think it's fine, maybe that's not responsible.
I mean, I kind of trust Canonical. I don't know if they do that, but if they do, I trust them about it. If they don't, then we maybe have problems for people that want to attestation. But
So let's go and figure out if we can get Canonical to attest things first and foremost, so that we don't have to do that work. Because I'd hate to have to rebuild their stuff for our needs. But if they won't, then we have to figure out what the next step is. And we should probably think that through on the console management repo. But yeah, that's a great question. All right. Anything else? Anything on anyone online? All right. All right. Well, I want to say thank you to Broadwing. Thank you to Taylor. And another thank you to Cole for walking us through this stuff. We're going to take just a few minute break, not a long one, as we can get moved around. So the architect folks, we're going to go back to the other room. We're going to join the other Zoom, and the tutorial is going to pick up right where we left off, right here, as soon as Devin can get up to the podium. So we'll mute for a moment, but we'll be back online very soon.